Evelyn had never been one to believe in fate. Life was unpredictable, full of choices and consequences, but never something predetermined. Yet, as she stood in her grandmother's dimly lit attic, dust swirling around her like faded memories, she felt an unexplainable pull toward the old, leather-bound book buried in a forgotten chest. The attic had always been a place of childhood wonder. As a little girl, she used to sneak up here with a flashlight, sifting through antique trinkets and forgotten keepsakes. But after her grandmother passed, it had become just another neglected space, filled with dust-covered boxes and echoes of the past. Today, she was here out of necessity, helping her parents clear the house for its eventual sale. She pulled the book out carefully, its cover worn and cracked with age. There was no title, no author's name. Just a simple gold-embossed design of swirling vines that seemed almost alive under the dim light. When she opened it, she expected blank pages, or perhaps old scribbled notes. Instead, her heart stopped. The words written inside weren't just words. They were her words. Evelyn pressed the book tightly to her chest, her pulse quickening. Her fingers trembled as she traced the pages, reading what should have been impossible. The story within these pages was hers. Every heartbreak, every fleeting romance, every whispered conversation she had thought long forgotten. Every love lost. She flipped faster, scanning paragraph after paragraph. It recounted her first boyfriend, the one who had kissed her in the rain under the willow tree at school. The chapter about Daniel, the man who had promised her forever but left her with nothing but an empty apartment and a half-drunk bottle of wine. Even her most recent heartbreak, the one she wasn't ready to face yet, was written there in ink that seemed fresh, as though the book had been waiting for her to read it. "How?" she whispered to the empty attic. And then she saw it. The final written page. The newest words. "Tomorrow, you will meet the love of your life." Evelyn's breath hitched. She turned the page. It was blank. Evelyn stared at the empty page, her fingers tightening around the book's worn cover. The words seemed to echo in her mind. "Tomorrow, you will meet the love of your life." Her rational mind told her it was a coincidence. A trick. Maybe an old diary she had forgotten about, something she had written herself and left behind. And yet, the details were too precise. No diary could predict tomorrow. She shut the book, hugging it to her chest as she climbed down from the attic. Dust clung to her jeans, and her hands were smudged with age-old grime, but she barely noticed. The book felt heavy in her grasp, not just physically, but with the weight of something unknown. In the kitchen, her mother was boxing up dishes, the sound of glass clinking against cardboard filling the air. "Find anything interesting?" her mom asked, glancing over her shoulder. Evelyn hesitated, then held up the book. "Just this." It was in Grandma's attic. Her mother squinted at it, then shrugged. "She had a lot of old things. Probably belonged to her, or your grandfather." Evelyn nodded absently, not convinced. If it belonged to her grandmother, why did it contain her love life? "Did Grandma ever have any books she wrote in?" she asked. Her mother thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Not that I remember." "She loved reading, but writing?"
No.
"Why?" "Just curious." She kept the book close as she finished helping around the house. But the whole time, her mind was elsewhere, lingering on that last sentence.
Tomorrow.
That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't resist the urge to open the book again. She flipped through the pages, her pulse racing as she reread her past, every chapter leading her to where she was now. Finally, she returned to the last written line. "Tomorrow, you will meet the love of your life." What did that even mean? She had met plenty of people before. What made tomorrow different? And who was writing this? Sleep came fitfully. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw ink forming on paper, unseen hands writing her fate. By morning, she wasn't sure if she wanted to prove the book right or wrong. But when she stepped outside and walked into town, something inside her whispered, "Pay attention." And then it happened. A collision. A coffee spill. A pair of familiar eyes looking into hers. Evelyn. Her breath caught. She never expected him. Evelyn blinked, startled by the deep, familiar voice that spoke her name. She looked up, heart pounding, and found herself staring into a pair of striking blue eyes she hadn't seen in years. Liam. His name slipped from her lips before she could stop it. Liam Carter. A face from her past. A memory she had buried. The last time she had seen him, they had been in college. He had been the charming, reckless dreamer who always had a new adventure planned. They had been close, almost something more. But life had pulled them in different directions before anything real could begin. And now here he was. Wow. Liam said, a slow smile spreading across his face. I can't believe it's you. Evelyn swallowed, still gripping the book tightly in her hands. The book that had said, tomorrow, you will meet the love of your life. Was it talking about him? What are you doing here? She asked, forcing herself to sound normal. Liam chuckled, holding up a coffee cup that was now dripping onto his jacket. Apparently, making a mess. She looked down, realizing the impact of their collision. His coffee had splattered onto her sweater, the warm liquid seeping through the fabric. God, I'm so sorry, he said quickly. Let me. It's fine, she interrupted, shaking her head. Really, it's my fault. But he was already pulling napkins from his pocket, dabbing at her sleeve. The small, familiar gesture made something stir inside her. Memories of a time when he had always been like this, effortlessly thoughtful. I was actually just on my way to grab breakfast, he said, crumpling the napkin. Can I make it up to you with coffee? Maybe even a fresh sweater if we find the right store? Evelyn hesitated. Was this it? Was this the moment the book had been leading her to? If she said yes, was she walking into destiny? Or was she just falling into a carefully crafted illusion? Her fingers tightened around the book. I have to know. Okay, she said, meeting his gaze. Coffee sounds good. Evelyn sat on her bed, staring at the book, her heart still racing from the day's events. Liam had been everything she remembered.
Warm.
Easy to talk to. The kind of person who could make an ordinary day feel like an adventure. She had laughed with him over coffee, caught up on lost years. And when they had parted ways, he had said, let's not wait another 5 years before we do this again. She had agreed. And now, as she flipped through the book, her hands trembled. New words had appeared. A perfect retelling of her day. Word for word. She reached the last written line and felt her breath hitch. But fate isn't so easily rewritten. Her stomach twisted. What did that mean? She turned the page. It was blank. Waiting. Evelyn ran her fingers over the inked words, heart hammering against her ribs. But fate isn't so easily rewritten. What did that mean? Her hands trembled as she flipped back through the book, rereading the pages that had appeared overnight. Every moment with Liam had been recorded exactly as it happened. The coffee spill, the way he had laughed, the easy way they had fallen back into conversation. It was impossible. And yet there it was. She swallowed hard, then turned the page again. The blank space seemed to mock her, daring her to guess what would come next. Would it continue writing? Would it tell her what Liam would do next? Or was it waiting for her to act? A million thoughts ran through her mind, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a book. It was something more. She had to figure out who was writing it. The next morning, Evelyn decided to challenge the book. If it truly knew her life, then it would have to keep up with something unpredictable. So she changed her plans. Instead of going to the cafe she usually visited, she took a different route to work. Instead of texting Liam back immediately, she left his message on read. And when her coworker, Mia, invited her out for dinner, she said yes, something she wouldn't have done before. She needed to see if the book could predict the unexpected. That night, when she got home, she hesitated before opening it. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she flipped to the last page. And there it was. Every moment she had tried to change. The book had adjusted. It hadn't forced her into the cafe. It hadn't made her text Liam. Instead, it had recorded everything just as it happened. Her decisions, her choices, her little attempts to defy fate. But one thing caught her eye. A new passage had appeared at the bottom of the page. No matter which path you take, some things remain the same. A chill ran down her spine. She turned the page. Tomorrow, He will ask you on a real date. Evelyn's breath hitched.
Liam.
It had to be him. But something inside her whispered that this wasn't just about Liam. Someone was watching, writing, and they knew more than she did. Evelyn barely slept that night. The words in the book played on repeat in her mind. Tomorrow, he will ask you on a real date. Whoever was writing this, whoever was watching her life unfold, knew everything. And they weren't just recording. They were predicting. She sat in bed, staring at the book under the dim glow of her bedside lamp, her fingers tracing the edges of the old pages. She had tested it, tried to defy it, but the book didn't fight back. It adapted, adjusted, followed her like an unseen narrator. But someone had to be behind it, and she needed to find out who. The next day, Evelyn went about her routine, hyper-aware of everything. Liam texted her in the morning. Liam, I had a great time yesterday. Want to grab dinner tonight? Her breath caught. It was exactly what the book had predicted. She hesitated before replying. What if she said no? Would the book change again? Would it still find a way to make this moment happen? Before she could talk herself out of it, she typed a response. Evelyn, sure. Where? Within seconds, his reply came. Liam, surprise. Just be ready at 7. She exhaled sharply. Maybe this was fate. Maybe it wasn't. But she was going to find out. By the time 7 p.m. rolled around, Evelyn was dressed in her favorite navy blue dress, standing outside her apartment as Liam pulled up in his car. You look amazing, he said as she got in. Thanks, she murmured, forcing a smile, her thoughts still tangled around the book. Liam took her to a cozy little restaurant by the waterfront. The kind of place that had soft lighting, warm candles flickering on every table, and a quiet buzz of conversation in the air. Over dinner they talked, really talked. About life, about their time apart, about the way things never quite worked out back then. And for a while, Evelyn forgot about the book. Forgot about fate. It felt real. He felt real. By the time they stepped outside, the night air was cool, and the city lights reflected on the river beside them. I'm really glad we did this, Liam said, shoving his hands into his pockets. I meant it when I said I don't want to wait years before seeing you again. Evelyn hesitated, her heart warring with her mind. If she had never found the book, would she still be standing here? Would she have let herself fall back into Liam's world this easily? Before she could answer, Liam suddenly stepped closer. Her breath caught. Can I kiss you? He asked softly. The book had never mentioned this moment. This choice was hers. And for the first time since she found it, she didn't care what the next page would say. She nodded, and when his lips met hers, she forgot about everything else. Late that night, Evelyn returned home, her heart still pounding. She hesitated before reaching for the book. Taking a deep breath, she flipped to the last page. The entire date was written, word for word. And then, a new passage. But she still hasn't figured it out. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Her hands shook as she turned the page. A single sentence stared back at her. He's closer than you think. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. This wasn't about Liam. This was about the writer. And they were watching. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the book as her pulse pounded in her ears. He's closer than you think. She looked around her dimly lit apartment, her breath shallow. The words sent an eerie chill down her spine. Whoever was writing this wasn't just an observer. They were near, watching. The thought made her stomach twist. She forced herself to take slow, steady breaths. Think, Evelyn. Think. If someone was this close to her life, close enough to know what she did, what she said, even what she felt, then it had to be someone she knew. Someone she saw often. Her mind raced through possibilities. Liam? No, that didn't make sense. The book had written about him before he even texted her. He was being written about, not writing it. Mia, her coworker? But why would she do something like this? Or, her thoughts skidded to a halt. No. It couldn't be. Could it? Her fingers trembled as she picked up her phone and scrolled through her messages until she found the name she was looking for. Nathan Parker. She stared at it for a long moment. Nathan had been in her life for years. Her quiet, dependable friend. The one who always showed up when she needed him. The one who never asked for more, never demanded anything from her. But he had always been there. The book's words echoed in her mind. He's closer than you think. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She had to find out the truth. The next day, Evelyn made a plan. She texted Nathan. Evelyn, hey, are you free to meet? There's something I want to talk about. Nathan, of course. Usual cafe? Evelyn, yeah. 6 p.m. Her hands felt clammy as she set the phone down. If Nathan was behind the book, he wouldn't be surprised by this message, because he'd already know it was coming. The cafe was quiet when she arrived. Nathan was already sitting at their usual table, a coffee in front of him. He looked up as she approached, his dark brown eyes warm, familiar. Hey, he greeted her with a smile. You okay? Evelyn sat down, gripping the book inside her bag. Yeah, she lied. Just something weird happened. Nathan tilted his head, concern flickering across his face. What kind of weird? She hesitated. Then, carefully, she pulled the book from her bag and set it on the table between them. Nathan's expression didn't change. No surprise. No confusion. Nothing. Her chest tightened. You know what this is, don't you? She asked quietly. Nathan didn't speak for a long moment. Then, slowly, he exhaled. Yeah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I do. Evelyn's heart stopped. She had been right. Nathan was the writer. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Nathan didn't deny it. Didn't ask what she meant. Didn't even flinch. She stared at him, searching his face for something, anything, that would make this make sense. You wrote it, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, glancing at the book between them. I did, he admitted. A sharp chill ran through her. You knew everything, she said, her voice trembling now. My thoughts. My choices. Her breath hitched. My feelings. Nathan's lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but he hesitated. Evelyn clenched her fists.
How?
For the first time, she saw uncertainty in his eyes. I don't know, he said softly. It just started one day. She shook her head, disbelief crashing over her. That's not an answer, Nathan. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. I was writing a journal, he said finally. About you. Evelyn's stomach twisted. You were what? Nathan sighed. Not like that. I've known you for years, Ev. And he swallowed. I've loved you for just as long. Her heart skipped a beat. I never planned to tell you, he admitted, his voice raw. I thought if I wrote it down, I could just live with it. Keep it to myself. Evelyn could barely breathe. But then one day, my words weren't just my thoughts anymore. He tapped the book lightly. They started becoming real. Her mind reeled. You're saying whatever you wrote started happening? Nathan nodded. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. But then I tested it. Small things. I'd write about you choosing tea instead of coffee, and the next day you would. Evelyn's hands trembled. Did you? She swallowed, barely able to ask the question. Did you make me go on that date with Liam? Nathan's expression darkened. No, he said firmly. I never forced anything. I only wrote what I felt would happen. And somehow the book wrote the rest. Evelyn's head spun. This was insane. Impossible. And yet, every word in that book had been real. It had followed her life exactly. Nathan had followed her life exactly. Her stomach churned. You watched me fall for someone else. Nathan looked down, his jaw tight. I did, he admitted. Because I thought it was what you wanted. Her breath came fast now, too many emotions crashing down at once. And the last thing you wrote, she whispered, was he's closer than you think. Nathan didn't look away. Because it had never been about Liam. It had always been about him. Evelyn felt as if the world had shifted beneath her feet. Nathan, her friend, her constant, had been writing the story of her life. And all this time, she had never seen it. Say something, Nathan said quietly, his fingers curled into fists on the table. Evelyn opened her mouth, but the words tangled in her throat. You wrote it, she finally whispered. You wrote me. Nathan flinched. No, Ev. I never controlled you. I only wrote what I thought would happen. It wasn't me making choices for you. It was like I could feel them before you did. Her breath was shallow, heart pounding. So what now? If you pick up a pen and write, does my life change again? Nathan's jaw tightened.
No.
Not unless you want it to. Evelyn let out a bitter laugh. And if I don't? Then I stop writing, he said softly. A long silence stretched between them. Evelyn's mind raced with memories. The late-night talks. The way Nathan had always seemed to understand her in ways no one else did. The way he was always there, not just as a friend, as someone who saw her, even when she didn't see herself. She thought of Liam, how their date had felt good, comfortable, but had it ever felt inevitable? She wasn't sure anymore. Evelyn reached for the book with trembling fingers. She flipped to the last page. The words stared back at her, written in neat, familiar handwriting. But she still hasn't figured it out. Her breath caught. Slowly, she turned to the next line. She doesn't have to follow the story. Her heart stopped. She looked up at Nathan, her throat tight. You didn't write that, did you? Nathan shook his head.
No.
I stopped after the last sentence. A shiver ran down her spine. The book had changed on its own, and it was telling her something. She doesn't have to follow the story. This was her choice. Not Nathan's. Not the book's. Hers. Evelyn inhaled shakily, closing the book. When she looked at Nathan, she saw him in a way she never had before. Not as the writer. Not as the friend who had always waited in the shadows. But as the man who had always known her heart, even before she did. She reached for his hand. Nathan's breath hitched. Evelyn met his gaze. Then let's write a new story, she whispered. And for the first time, the book remained blank. Because the next chapter was theirs to create. Evelyn's fingers curled around Nathan's hand, her touch hesitant, yet steady. The warmth of his skin was real. Unlike the words in the book, unlike the eerie sense of inevitability that had guided her life until now. This moment was hers, and it terrified her. Nathan was watching her, his dark eyes cautious, waiting. He had spent years writing her story, but now, for the first time, he was letting her decide. Evelyn pulled her hand back slowly and exhaled. I don't know how to feel about all of this. Nathan nodded. I don't expect you to. Do you even realize how huge this is? Her voice rose slightly as the weight of everything pressed down on her. You weren't just writing some harmless diary, Nathan. You were shaping my life. I wasn't, he said firmly. I swear, Evelyn. I wasn't forcing anything. I just understood you. Maybe too well. She let out a dry laugh. That's an understatement. Silence settled between them, thick and charged. The cafe around them buzzed with life, people chatting, the smell of roasted coffee filling the air. But they were trapped in their own world. Finally, Nathan spoke again, his voice softer this time. If I could take it back, I would. Evelyn looked down at the book in her lap. Its pages, once filled with the eerie documentation of her life, now lay blank, waiting. Her fingers traced the edges of the leather cover. What if you wrote something now? Nathan blinked.
What?
She pushed the book toward him. Just write something?
Anything.
Let's see what happens. Nathan hesitated, then picked up his pen. Evelyn held her breath as he wrote a single sentence on the page. Evelyn reaches for her coffee. Her heart pounded. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand and wrapped her fingers around her coffee cup. Her breath shuddered. I would have done that anyway, she said quickly. That doesn't mean. Nathan scribbled something else. She puts it down without taking a sip. Evelyn froze. Her fingers tightened around the cup. She could feel the heat against her palm, could almost taste the rich aroma of roasted beans. The book was waiting, testing her, daring her. She forced herself to lift the cup to her lips and took a slow sip. Nathan exhaled.
See?
You're not bound to it. Evelyn set the cup down carefully, her mind racing. Then why did everything else happen exactly as it was written? Nathan shook his head. I don't know. His voice was tired, aching. Maybe it was all just intuition. Maybe I understood you so well that I could predict what you'd do before you did it. But the moment you knew about the book, he gestured toward the blank page. The spell broke. Evelyn ran a hand through her hair. So what happens now? Nathan hesitated. What do you want to happen? She looked at him. Really looked at him. This was Nathan. Her friend. The man who had watched her, written her, loved her from the sidelines. Had she truly never noticed? Her mind flashed back to late-night conversations, to his quiet patience, to the way he had always understood her silences. Had she been blind all this time? Her throat tightened. Nathan, he tensed slightly. She exhaled, forcing herself to be honest. I don't know if I love you the way you love me. Nathan nodded slowly. I know, but, she continued, choosing her words carefully, I want to find out. His eyes widened just slightly. Evelyn reached for the book and turned to the next blank page. Let's write it together, she whispered. Nathan swallowed hard, his hand closing over hers. No more predictions, he murmured. No more knowing the future. Evelyn smiled, small but certain. Just us. Writing our own story. One day at a time. She picked up the pen and, for the first time, wrote the words herself. Tomorrow is unwritten. And this time, the book didn't change a single word. A year had passed since Evelyn had closed the book for the last time. It now sat untouched on her bookshelf, its once mysterious pages blank, waiting for a story that would never again be dictated by unseen hands. Because for the first time in her life, Evelyn was living without a script. And she had never felt more alive. She leaned against the railing of a small cafe terrace, a soft breeze playing with the loose strands of her hair. The city was alive beneath her, laughter and the hum of conversation filling the air. Behind her, Nathan arrived with 2 cups of coffee. I got you the caramel one, he said, setting it down in front of her. Evelyn grinned. So, you still know what I'm going to choose before I do? Nathan smirked, taking the seat across from her. Old habits. She rolled her eyes, but took the cup anyway. So, he said, resting his chin on his hand. How does it feel? Evelyn arched a brow. How does what feel? Not knowing what's next. Her smile softened. It was strange, at first, stepping into the unknown without a book telling her what was coming. But it was also freeing. Every choice she made now was hers, and hers alone. She had spent months untangling the emotions she had buried, sorting through the past, questioning what was real and what was simply expectation. And in the end, she had chosen this. Nathan. Not because of the book, not because it was written, but because, without any script, she still found herself drawn to him. She met his gaze. It feels like an adventure. Nathan's expression softened. Good, he said. Because I was thinking maybe we write a different kind of story together. Evelyn tilted her head. Oh, and what kind is that? Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather notebook. One we fill with real memories, he said, placing it between them. No predictions. No expectations. Just moments, ours to keep. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment before slowly picking it up. She ran her fingers over the cover, then flipped it open. The first page was blank. Her heart swelled. Grabbing a pen, she wrote the first words herself. Today we had coffee.
He smiled at me.
And for the first time I realized. She paused, looking up at Nathan, who watched her with quiet patience, just as he always had. Evelyn smiled, finished her sentence, and closed the book. Nathan reached for it, flipping to the page. His lips parted slightly as he read her words. This is only the beginning. Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. You always did have a way with words. Evelyn laughed. Guess I learned from the best. She took his hand in hers, squeezing gently. No more books telling us where to go. No more predictions. Just us. Nathan lifted their joined hands and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. Just us, he murmured. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, their story truly began. Unwritten, unscripted, and entirely their own.